Commander Draevon Keth had destroyed 17 civilizations. Not personally, of course. He was a commander, not a butcher. He had people for the actual destroying. But the orders, the strategy, the cold and efficient architecture of annihilation, that was his. All 17 of those dead civilizations had one thing in common. They had looked up at the Vorrkai fleet and understood, immediately, that it was over. Some had begged. Some had bargained. The Vorrkai of the Outer Belt had actually applauded when the fleet arrived, mistaking the warships for some kind of celestial parade. That particular misunderstanding had lasted approximately 4 minutes. Draevon liked it when they understood quickly. It saved time. He stood at the observation window of the command deck of the VIS Eternal Verdict, and he looked down at the small blue-green planet, rotating slowly in the dark. And he felt nothing remarkable. It was a wet planet, lots of water. A thin atmosphere held together with oxygen and nitrogen, which was ordinary, and the surface was covered with these small, fragile, soft-bodied creatures who had somehow convinced themselves they were the dominant species of their star system. They called themselves humans. The intelligence files described them as bipedal, emotionally volatile, technologically adolescent, and completely unaware that the wider universe had any opinion of them whatsoever. The wider universe's opinion, for the record, was irrelevant. "Sir," said Lieutenant Vorrkai, pulling up the tactical display with the bored efficiency of someone who had done this 100 times. "Surface scans are complete. Population centers identified. Largest concentrations are here." He pointed at the glowing clusters on the map. "Military installations are modest. Their most advanced projectile systems would not scratch our hull plating." "Obviously," said Draevon. "Their communication satellites are active. They know we are here. Also, obvious, they have sent no response yet." "They are frightened," said Draevon. "Give them time. They always send a response when they are frightened. It is usually something involving the word peace, delivered by someone in formal clothing who is trying very hard not to cry." The bridge crew exchanged glances. A few of them smiled. Senior tactician Bresva Cole, who had served with Draevon for 11 years and had seen all 17 of those civilizations fold like wet paper, leaned back in her chair and said, "Estimated time to full compliance?" Draevon considered the planet. He considered the intelligence files. He considered 17 prior civilizations, all of whom had seemed, in their own way, convinced they were special. "2 days," he said. "Maybe 3, if they have a politician who likes to talk." Everyone laughed. It was a comfortable laugh. The laugh of people who are very good at their jobs and know it. Nobody was worried. Not even slightly. Not even a little bit. That was the first mistake. The response came not in the form of a panicked diplomatic transmission, not in the form of a military challenge, which would have been foolish, but at least understandable. Not in any form that Draevon or Bresva or Lieutenant Vorrkai or any of the 43 crew members on the bridge of the VIS Eternal Verdict had seen before. A single shuttle launched from the surface. One shuttle. No escort, no weapons signature, no electronic warfare package, no distress beacon, which would have made sense. Just one small, battered, human-built spacecraft that climbed out of the atmosphere with all the quiet confidence of something that had no idea it should be afraid. "Track it," said Draevon, mostly out of reflex. "Already tracking," said Vorrkai. "It is heading directly for us." "Weapons?" "None detectable." "Passengers?" A pause. Vorrkai checked twice. Then he looked at Draevon with an expression that could only be described as deeply puzzled. "One," he said. "One. Passenger, sir." Draevon turned from the observation window and looked at his lieutenant. "One. One. They sent one. creature. Yes, sir. Draevon looked at the shuttle on the tactical display. He looked at his fleet, 240 warships arranged in standard approach formation, enough firepower to strip the atmosphere from a medium-sized moon. And he looked at this one tiny shuttle with its one tiny passenger, and he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt curious. "Bring it into Docking Bay 7, he said. "Full security detail. I want to see this." The shuttle docked without incident. The passenger walked out without incident. The security detail, 12 of Draevon's finest soldiers in full combat armor, surrounded her without incident, and she stood in the middle of them with her hands loose at her sides and looked around the docking bay with the mild, unhurried interest of someone visiting a market they had heard about but were not particularly impressed by. She was young, very young by human standards, based on the intelligence files, dark hair pulled back from her face, a plain gray jacket, boots that had seen better decades, no rank insignia, no weapons, no armor, no apparent awareness that she was standing inside the most dangerous warship in the known galaxy, surrounded by soldiers who could reduce her to a fine mist with minimal paperwork. Draevon walked into the docking bay. He looked at her. She looked at him. She smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not a diplomatic smile. A smile that sat somewhere between amusement and something Draevon could not immediately identify, which bothered him because he was very good at reading things. "You are the commander?" she said, through the translator unit clipped to her collar. "I am," said Draevon. "Good," she said. "I wanted to talk to the right person." Her name was Mira Calloway. The intelligence files had not mentioned her, which was not surprising because the intelligence files on humanity were approximately 3 years old and had been compiled by a reconnaissance drone that had spent most of its operational life in low orbit and had never once landed on the surface. The files were, in retrospect, the equivalent of trying to understand the ocean by looking at it from very high up. You could see the color. You could see the shape. You had absolutely no idea what was living in it. Mira Calloway was 19 years old, according to the human age counting system, which tracked individual life from birth in units called years, each year being one full rotation of their planet around their star. 19 of those, which, by the developmental standards of most spacefaring civilizations, made her barely past infancy. She did not behave like something barely past infancy. She sat across from Draevon in the interrogation room, which had been chosen deliberately for its cold walls and its uncomfortable chair and its single harsh light, all of which were standard tools for establishing psychological dominance over a new subject. Mira Calloway looked at the cold walls and the uncomfortable chair and the single harsh light with the expression of someone who had sat in worse chairs, in worse rooms, under worse lights, and was not particularly moved. Draevon sat across from her. Bresva stood at the wall behind him, arms folded, watching with the sharp attention she gave to everything she thought might become a problem. "You have been briefed," said Draevon, "on what we are." "More or less," said Mira. "Then you understand the purpose of this visit." "More or less," she said again, and the repetition was not carelessness. It was deliberate. She was telling him, very gently, that she found his framing imprecise. "Your world," said Draevon, "will be incorporated into the Vorrkai Empire. This is not a negotiation. This is a notification. The only variable is how much damage occurs during the transition. That variable is determined by how cooperative your leadership chooses to be." Mira nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they are being told something they already know. "I have been authorized," said Draevon, "to offer terms." "I appreciate that," said Mira. "Your compliance will result in minimal civilian casualties, maintained infrastructure, and a standard integration protocol. Your resistance will result in the opposite." Said Mira. Draevon paused. He had given some version of this speech to representatives of 11 different civilizations. Usually by this point, there was some kind of reaction. Tears, anger, desperate bargaining, shocked silence. Something. Mira Calloway was looking at him with those calm, dark eyes, and she was waiting for him to finish. And she had not reacted at all. And Draevon found this profoundly irritating, which he did not show, because he was professional. "Do you have a response?" he asked. Mira tilted her head slightly. Then she said, very clearly and very simply, "Congrats. You just started your end." The room was quiet. Bresva's eyes flicked to the back of Draevon's head and then back to the girl. Draevon looked at Mira. Mira looked at Draevon. She was not smiling now. She was entirely serious. And in that seriousness, Draevon finally identified the thing he had not been able to name in the docking bay. It was pity. This 19-year-old human, in her worn boots and her plain gray jacket, sitting in his interrogation room on his flagship, surrounded by his fleet of 240 warships, felt sorry for him. Draevon decided she was either the bravest creature he had ever met or the most delusional. He would spend the next several days determining which. Draevon was not a careless commander. Arrogant, perhaps, in the way that success over a long period tends to produce arrogance, but not careless. When Mira Calloway said what she said, and he sent her back to her shuttle with a polite but firm instruction to convey the Empire's terms to her leadership, he did not dismiss her words entirely. He sent scouts, 4 teams, 12 soldiers each, full equipment, stealth entry protocols, objectives, assess surface military infrastructure, identify command structures, locate and map weapons caches, evaluate civilian resistance capacity. Standard pre-integration survey. He had run this exact operation on 23 planets. The average time to completion was 16 hours. The average number of incidents was 0.3 per team, which mostly meant someone twisting an ankle in unfamiliar terrain. Team 1 landed in a place called Nevada, flat, hot, apparently full of things that wanted to eat them, sting them, or inject them with various biological unpleasantries. The report at hour 4 was progressing, no contact. The report at hour 8 was proceeding to secondary objective, minor equipment malfunction. The report at hour 12 was requesting extraction, 3 casualties, nature of incident unclear. The report at hour 16 was silence. Team 2 landed near a large population center the humans called Chicago. Concrete and steel, loud. Confusing infrastructure with too many layers and too many people moving in too many directions. The report at hour 4 was surveillance established, no issues. The report at hour 8 was possible detection, continuing mission. The report at hour 12 was a single broken transmission that contained the words, "They knew, they already," and then nothing. Team 3 landed in a mountainous region humans called the Caucasus. Old land. Very old, based on the geological scans. Team 3's reports were actually detailed and professional all the way through hour 14, which was the most information Draevon got from any of the surface teams. Their final report noted that the humans in the region appeared to have, quote, an extremely high tolerance for adversarial conditions, seemingly generational in nature, and a level of territorial awareness that does not match their listed technological tier. Then Team 3 also went quiet. Team 4 never filed any reports at all. Draevon stood in front of the tactical display and looked at 48 silence markers where 48 soldiers had been, and he was quiet for a long time. Bresva stood beside him. She was also quiet. 48 soldiers, said Draevon finally. Yes, said Bresva. No confirmed kills on their side. No confirmed kills. No distress signals. They just, said Draevon, and he paused, and he tried to find the right word, and the right word was uncomfortable. So he said it anyway, vanished. Bresva pulled up the last partial transmission from Team 2. They both listened to it again. They knew. They already. Draevon played it 3 times. He was trying to determine if new referred to the scout's presence or to something larger. He could not determine it. He filed it as ambiguous and moved on, because ambiguity was not something the Empire had procedures for, and therefore it was professionally inconvenient. He did not sleep well that night. He told himself that was a coincidence. On the second day, Draevon called a full intelligence review. He brought in senior analyst Peth Varun, who was the best data interpreter on the fleet and who had the particular skill of being able to deliver very bad news in a very calm voice, which Draevon appreciated. Peth spread the humanity files across the display table, and the two of them, along with Bresva, went through every piece of information the Empire had gathered on the species in the past 3 years. It took 4 hours. By hour 1, Draevon noticed that the history section was significantly longer than the history sections for most pre-integration civilizations. He noted this without concern. By hour 2, he was concerned. By hour 3, Peth Varun, who had a professional reputation for calm, said, "Sir, I want to flag something," and his voice was doing a thing it did not usually do, which was waver slightly. "Flag it," said Draevon. "This species," said Peth slowly, "has been engaged in continuous, organized, large-scale warfare with itself for approximately 10,000 years of recorded history. Many species fight internally before integration," said Bresva. "Yes," said Peth. "Most of them either achieve stability or destroy themselves within 2,000 to 3,000 years. Humans have been doing this for 10,000 years, and their population has increased by a factor of approximately 400% during that period." The room processed this. "They were killing each other," said Draevon, "and growing." "Continuously," said Peth. "Sir, the biological section is also interesting." He pulled it up. "Their pain tolerance is significantly above galactic average. Their healing rate is above average. Their stress hormones, the chemicals their bodies release under threat, actually enhance physical performance in short bursts, rather than degrading it." "We know this," said Bresva. "Adrenaline. It is in the files." "Yes," said Peth, "but I do not think the files convey the scale of it. In the same way that a summary of a fire does not fully convey what it is like to stand next to one." He paused. "There is also the psychological section. Their most effective soldiers, throughout recorded history, are individuals who have survived significant trauma. Their culture, across nearly every geographic region and historical period, glorifies not ease or safety, but suffering endured." Draevon looked at the display. He looked at 10,000 years of human warfare, mapped across a small blue-green planet, each conflict marked in red, and the red marks were so dense they were nearly solid. "They are not a civilization that learned to survive," said Peth carefully. "They are a civilization that was built by not surviving, over and over, until the ones who remained were the ones who could." The room was very quiet. Draevon thought about Mira Calloway, 19 years old, sitting in the interrogation chair, feeling sorry for him. "Why?" he said slowly. "Did the initial intelligence assessment rate them as low threat?" Peth Varun looked at the assessment rating, and then looked at the data, and then looked back at Draevon, and said, with the careful honesty of a man who valued his professional reputation, "Because the assessment was written by someone who looked at their current technology and did not look at the species behind the technology, sir. Draevon closed the files. He looked at the planet, small and blue, and rotating gently in the dark. He thought about 48 soldiers who had vanished. He thought about the girl with the calm eyes who had said, "Congrats. You just started your end," and had meant every single syllable. He made a decision, and the decision was wrong, and he would know that very soon. High Command contacted Draevon at the start of the third day. Fleet Admiral Draevon Keth, who ran the expansion division from a comfortable office on the Vorrkai homeworld and had not personally visited a pre-integration target in 30 years, appeared on the comm screen with the cheerful authority of someone who had a great deal of confidence in people who were far away from the situation. "Draevon," said the Fleet Admiral, "I am seeing delays in the compliance timeline." "There have been complications," said Draevon. "Complications," repeated the Fleet Admiral, in the tone of someone tasting a word and finding it insufficient. "This is a pre-spacefaring civilization with kinetic projectile weapons and primitive energy systems. What complications could there be?" Draevon considered telling him about 48 soldiers and 10,000 years of continuous war, and a 19-year-old girl who felt sorry for empires. He considered this for approximately 2 seconds, and then decided that Draevon Keth, from his comfortable office, would not understand any of it in a way that would be useful. "I recommend a delayed approach," said Draevon. "Additional intelligence gathering before we escalate." "Denied," said the Fleet Admiral. "We are on a schedule, Draevon. Demonstrate force. 1 strike, civilian adjacent, to minimize political complications. Sufficient to communicate capability and intent. Standard protocol. This should have been done on day 1. The comm closed. Draevon looked at the dark space where Draevon Keth's face had been, and he thought about saying no, and then he thought about what no would cost him, and he gave the order. The target was a coastal industrial city the humans called Rijeka, not heavily populated by human standards. Strategic infrastructure, port facilities. The kind of target that communicated, "You are serious," without communicating, "You are merciless," which was the diplomatic distinction the Empire preferred in early-phase operations. The strike was clean and precise, as the Vorrkai Empire's strikes always were. 2 orbital bombardment rounds, surgical in their placement, intended to level approximately 12 city blocks of industrial infrastructure and leave the residential areas intact. A message in the language of fire and rubble, which was a language every civilization understood. The strike landed at local morning. The crew watched the impact assessment on the tactical display. Good coverage. Expected structural damage. Clean result. Several officers nodded approvingly. Then Brezva said, very quietly, "Sir, look at the response time." Draevon looked. The humans had begun evacuating that district 7 hours before the strike landed. Not after. Not during. 7 hours before, based on the population movement data the sensors were now pulling from the area, the civilian population of those 12 city blocks had begun moving away from them in a very organized and very deliberate manner. The industrial district had been empty when the rounds hit. Every single person had already left. Draevon sat very still at the command chair. "They knew," said Vorrkai from the tactical station, and his voice had a shape to it that had not been there 2 days ago, a shape that was the beginning of something Draevon recognized as fear and did not like hearing from his crew. "How?" said Brezva, and it was not quite a question, more of a word she said out loud because she needed to say something. Nobody answered, because nobody had an answer. The response came 40 minutes after the strike. It did not come from the surface. It came from everywhere. The first indication was a sensor alert from the VIS Iron Patience, positioned at the outer edge of the fleet formation, reporting an unidentified contact on close approach. Then the same alert from the VIS Seventh Throne. Then from the VIS Pale Dominion. Then from 6 ships simultaneously. Then 12. And then Vorrkai was pulling at his console with both hands and saying, "Sir, sir," at increasing volume. And the tactical display was lighting up with contacts that had not been there 60 seconds ago. The humans had ships. Not many. Not by fleet standards. Perhaps 40, by the initial count, though the count kept changing because several of them were doing something to the sensors that the sensors had not been designed to account for. They were small, and they were fast, and they had appeared from what the post-incident analysis would eventually describe as pre-positioned concealed trajectories, meaning they had been waiting out there, in the dark between planets, patient and quiet, for exactly this moment. 40 human ships against 240 Vorrkai warships. The math was obvious, embarrassingly obvious. Then the human ships fired, and the math became less obvious. The weapons were not what the intelligence files had described. The intelligence files had described kinetic projectile systems and early-stage energy emitters. What hit the outer formation of the Vorrkai fleet were neither of those things. They were faster, and they were smarter, and they had clearly been designed by someone who had studied exactly how Vorrkai shields worked and had engineered specifically around that study. The VIS Iron Patience took 3 hits in 40 seconds and went from fully operational to emergency power. The VIS Pale Dominion's navigation systems went dark and did not come back on. 2 smaller escort vessels in the outer ring collided with each other during the evasive response, which was not the humans' fault precisely, but was certainly a consequence of the chaos the humans had created. Draevon was standing, gripping the rail of the command platform, watching his 240-ship fleet go from calm and organized to scrambled and defensive in under 3 minutes. And then the comm channel opened, and Mira Calloway's voice came through with the same quality it had in the interrogation room, like still water on a windless day. "I told you," she said. No triumph, no anger, no performance. Just those 3 words, stated. As a plain and simple fact. Draevon looked at his tactical display. He looked at the damage reports coming in from the outer ring. He looked at 40 human ships that should have been nothing and were currently making 240 of the Empire's finest warships look considerably less fine. "Open a channel," he said. The channel opened. He said, "Calloway." She said, "Commander." He said, "What are those weapons?" She said, "Ours." He said, "That technology is not in the intelligence files." She said, "No, it is not." He said, "How long have you had it?" There was a pause, a brief one, and then she said, "Long enough," and the channel closed. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted 9 minutes. Then the human ships withdrew, clean and coordinated, back into whatever dark corner of the system they had come from, and the engagement was over, and Draevon's fleet was still standing, mostly, but it was standing the way something stands after being reminded that standing is not the same as winning. Final count: 4 Vorrkai vessels with critical damage, 11 with significant systems degradation, 0 human vessels destroyed, 0 human vessels captured, 0 human casualties confirmed. Draevon sat in the command chair for a long time after the tactical display returned to baseline. Bresva stood at the wall. She did not offer analysis because she did not have any. Vorrkai ran the numbers twice and then a third time, apparently hoping the third calculation would produce a different result. It did not. Draevon asked for the first contact footage. He watched it in his private quarters, alone, on a small screen, with the sound at low volume. He watched the shuttle dock. He watched the security detail surround Mira Calloway. He watched her walk out and look around the docking bay with that mild and unhurried expression. He watched himself walk in. He watched her look at him. He paused the footage on her face at the moment before she smiled. He studied it. He had been a commander for 31 years. He had read faces as a professional skill for that entire time. He had seen fear disguised as confidence. He had seen confidence disguised as calm. He had seen people perform courage when they had none, and he had seen people perform submission when they were actually measuring your weaknesses. And he was very good at telling the difference. He had read Mira Calloway's expression as either bravery or delusion. He had held those two options and examined them and not been satisfied with either. And now, sitting in his quarters after 9 minutes of engagement that had scratched his fleet in ways that should not have been possible, he finally understood what the third option was. It was neither bravery nor delusion. She had known. Not estimated, not hoped. Known. She had known what the scouts would find, or not find. She had known the strike would land on empty buildings. She had known those 40 ships were out there waiting. She had known, in the specific and detailed way that you only know something when you have prepared for it extensively and tested it and are confident in the result, that the Vorrkai fleet would come here and do exactly what it did, and that exactly what it did would not be enough. The expression on her face was pity. She had walked onto his ship and looked at his fleet and felt genuinely, sincerely sorry for it, because she already knew how this ended. Draevon set the footage down. He looked at the wall of his quarters. He thought about 31 years of commands and 17 civilizations and Sorvain death in his comfortable office, and the intelligence files compiled by a drone that had never once touched the surface. He thought about 10,000 years of war on a small blue-green planet, producing a species that evolved inside struggle like a blade being forged, hit and folded and hit and folded until it was something you could not break with ordinary force. He thought about a girl in worn boots who had come alone to a 240-ship fleet and had not been afraid. He thought, very specifically and very clearly, with the uncomfortable honesty that solitude sometimes produces, that they had made a very significant mistake. Sorvaini Death was not pleased. This was communicated to Draevon in a transmission that lasted 22 minutes, covered his strategic decisions in considerable critical detail, used the phrase unacceptable delay 4 times and the phrase fundamental failure twice, and concluded with the information that a second fleet, the Resurgence Arm, was being dispatched from the nearest staging point and would arrive in the system in approximately 6 standard days. The second fleet comprised 180 additional warships, including 3 Dominion-class heavy carriers that had not been deployed in a pre-integration operation since the Galveth campaign 20 years ago, which had been, at the time, the most heavily contested integration in Vorrkai expansion history. Draevon acknowledged the transmission, thanked the fleet admiral for the support, and did not say what he was thinking. What he was thinking was that the humans had anticipated this. He did not know how he knew that. It was not based on specific evidence. It was based on the accumulation of a pattern: the empty buildings, the vanishing scouts, the ambush from pre-positioned ships, the weapons designed to specifically counter Vorrkai shielding. This was not a civilization that reacted. This was a civilization that anticipated, that studied, that prepared quietly and extensively, and then waited for the moment they had prepared for. They had known the fleet was coming before it arrived. They had known what it would do. They had sent a 19-year-old girl to deliver a message that was not a bluff and not a threat, but a simple, precise statement of fact. Draevon was sitting with this thought when the transmission came in. It arrived simultaneously on every ship in the Vorrkai fleet. Every single one. Not through the command channel, not through the standard comm frequencies, but through every channel at once, which should not have been possible given that the fleet maintained independent encrypted communication systems specifically to prevent exactly this kind of penetration. The transmission was not audio, it was not visual, it was text, delivered in clean, precise Vorrkai script, which meant that whoever had written it had gone to the trouble of writing it in their language, which was a statement in itself. The text read, "To the commanders and crew of the Vorrkai fleet, currently positioned in the Sol system. The Resurgence Arm fleet has been identified and is being tracked from its staging point. Its arrival window, composition, and optimal intercept vectors are already known. You are not receiving reinforcements. You are sending us more ships. We want to be clear that this is not our preference. We take no pleasure in what is coming. We are a species that knows what war costs better than most. We are informing you of this not as a threat, but as an opportunity. Turn the fleet around. All fleets. Go home. Tell your empire that humanity is not available for integration. This is the only time this message will be sent. Mira Calloway, 1st Contact Division, Earth." Draevon read it twice. Then he called the bridge and asked if any ship in the fleet had been able to trace the transmission origin. Vorrkai said, "No, sir. Every attempt to trace it returned the same result. The transmission appeared to originate from the planet's surface, but it had entered the fleet's communication systems through a method the fleet's own engineers could not currently explain." Draevon looked at the message on the screen. He looked at the last line. 1st Contact Division. Not military, not weapons development, not strategic command. 1st Contact. This was the person humanity assigned to be the first face a new civilization saw. The Ritu diplomatic representative, the welcoming committee. And she had known everything. Draevon thought about what that meant for the people they had assigned to other things. On the 6th day, the Resurgence Arm arrived at the edge of the system. Or rather, it attempted to. The lead elements of the Second Fleet, 12 advance vessels running standard entry protocol, encountered what the subsequent logs would describe as a prepared engagement zone. Mines, but not mines in any configuration, the Vorrkai tactical database had catalogued. Energy disruption fields covering the standard approach vectors, and human ships, more of them this time, positioned with a precision that spoke of detailed foreknowledge of exactly which routes the Resurgence Arm would use, because those routes were standard Vorrkai entry doctrine, and the humans had clearly obtained and studied standard Vorrkai entry doctrine. Draevon listened to the engagement reports from the Resurgence Arm's commanders. He listened, too, the confusion in their voices, the same confusion that had been in his crew's voices 6 days ago, when 40 small human ships had done things that the intelligence files said they could not do. The Resurgence commanders had the same intelligence files. They had the same assumptions. They had more ships. It did not help as much as they had expected. Draevon sat in the command chair for the last time. He had made his decision. Not in the last hour. Not even that morning. Sometime between the 1st contact footage and the fleet-wide transmission, and the look on Mira Calloway's face frozen on his screen, the decision had assembled itself quietly in the back of his mind, the way true decisions sometimes do. Not with drama, but with the steady accumulation of understanding. He opened a private channel to Bresva. "The Resurgence Arm is going to take significant damage. he said. Yes, said Bresva. And then High Command will send more. Probably. And the humans will have prepared for that, too. A long pause. Probably, said Bresva again, and her voice had the quality of someone who has reached the same destination by a different road. Draevon opened a channel to Mira Calloway. It connected immediately, as if she had been waiting. Commander, she said. Calloway, he said. I have a question, and I want an honest answer, not a tactical one. A brief pause. All right, she said. How long, said Draevon, have you been preparing for us? The pause this time was longer. When she answered, her voice had something in it that was not smugness and not triumph, and was, again, something adjacent to sorrow. We did not know about you specifically, she said. We did not know when. We did not know how many ships. We did not know what you looked like. Another pause. But we have known for a long time that someone would come. And we decided, a long time ago, what we would say when they did. And what you would do, said Draevon. And what we would do, she agreed. Draevon thought about 10,000 years of war. He thought about a species that had been burning and rebuilding and burning and rebuilding on that small blue-green planet, folding itself into something harder with every generation, and looking up at the stars the whole time, and knowing, in that specific way that veterans of long suffering tend to know things, that peace, when it came, would have to be defended. I am withdrawing my fleet, said Draevon. A silence. I will communicate to High Command, he said, that this system is non-viable for integration, that the intelligence assessment was critically incomplete, that continued engagement represents unacceptable strategic risk. He paused. They will send someone else eventually. We know, said Mira, and you will prepare for that too. We always prepare, she said. It is what we do. Draevon closed the channel. He gave the withdrawal order. 240 ships, plus the battered remnants of the Resurgence advance element, pulling back from the system in clean and organized retreat. The crew was quiet as the small blue-green planet shrank on the observation screen. Nobody made a speech. Nobody asked questions. They had all heard enough by now to understand. That evening, Draevon wrote his final mission log entry. He sat at the desk in his quarters, and he wrote carefully because he wanted to be accurate. And this was the kind of accuracy that the Empire needed even if it did not want it. He wrote, Target system assessed as non-viable for standard integration protocol. Indigenous civilization designation. Human. Technological tier per intelligence files. Adolescent. Actual capability. Undetermined. And I mean that precisely. We do not know the full extent of what they have, because they did not show us. What they showed us was enough to make the point. What they kept back was presumably the part where things become irreversible. They let us retreat. I believe this was deliberate. I believe they could have prevented it. I believe the girl they sent to meet us, this 19-year-old with the calm eyes and the worn boots, and the patience of something very old, made a decision to give us the option to leave, because she is, at the center of it, exactly what her title says. First contact. Her job is to make contact, not to start wars. Her people have had enough wars. They did not want one more. They wanted us to go home. He paused. He looked at the wall. He finished. They called it their end when we arrived. I understand now that they were not speaking of their end. They were speaking of ours, the end of our assumptions, the end of our certainty, the end of a strategy built on intelligence that looked at the surface of a civilization and thought it understood the depth. We came here expecting to add a species to an empire. Instead, we were reminded of something the Vorrkai have not been reminded of in a very long time. He paused for the last time. That there are things in this universe which are not afraid of us, not because they do not know what we are, but because they know, far better than we ever did, what they are. He saved the log. He looked out the observation port at the stars. Somewhere behind the fleet, growing small and steady and blue and green in the dark, was a planet of creatures who had survived 10,000 years of trying to destroy each other, and had come out the other side of all that fire, not broken, not bitter, but ready, just ready. Draevon Keth, commander, destroyer of 17 civilizations, turned away from the window. He did not sleep badly that night. He slept like a man who has finally understood something, which is different from a man who is afraid, and different again from a man who is confident. It is the sleep of a man who is paying attention, finally, at last, paying attention.